So we just talked about secondary data, and part of secondary data is whether or not the data within that is aggregated or disaggregated. And that basically refers to the extent to which the information or data is broken down. Aggregate data is data that describes a group of observations with a grouping made on a defined criterion. Another definition I found is that aggregate data is taking two sets of data and presenting it as a whole, or essentially it's data taken from several measurements and presented in summary form for statistical analysis. It's often defined by geographic area, region, state, or census tract. And examples of aggregate data is immigration or emigration over a defined amount of time, or voter turnout for an election. So disaggregated data is data on individuals or single entities and are generally more informative and useful than aggregated data alone. It also helps highlight issues that pertain to certain subsets or outcomes of aggregated data. And examples of disaggregated data can be age, sociocultural background, gender, sexual orientation, income, geographic location, like urban or rural. So why is data disaggregation important? It essentially answers the question of why something is happening, or it helps answer it. I'll let you read the quotes yourself, but the McCastin reading highlighted an example of women were not being integrated into agricultural programs, and they found out that the interviews or the data collected was only data collected from men, and none of it was representing the female experience in that area. So in that example, the problem was non-gender disaggregated data, and it was greatly hindering the ability for women to be integrated into these programs and the planning of these programs. So bringing it back to the broad lesson this week, when we look at criteria and indicators of a C&I framework, our indicators should be disaggregating the aggregated data that helped make our criteria. It should be making the data more transparent as to what is affecting who and maybe why it's affecting who it's affecting. Data aggregation is easier to find through secondary data, making the cross-analysis even more important. We have to remember that secondary data has been processed and manipulated in some ways, and we need to analyze it for any potential bias.